Have you ever had that friend who is just trying to be helpful, be necessary, and be needed, and just everything they do is wrong, and you just want to say no, just no, let it go? We have that this week in our story about Jesus and poor Peter and the rest of the disciples. So last week we looked at Jesus asking them, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter right away saying, "You're the Messiah." And we went over what that could possibly mean for the apostles. And well, this week we run into it. It's a scripture that continues. And as I said previously, so many times actually in the past, I wish that the lectionary, I mean, it's great to have so we can focus on part of it every week, but it cuts up the story too much, and we don't see the continuation of Jesus walking down with his buddies and who do you say I am, and getting that confirmation. And then Jesus says, okay, now I can tell you kind of what we're expecting. And this is the turn. This is what people call the road to Jerusalem, or the there's another term, I can't think of it offhand, but the time in all the synoptic gospels where Jesus turns from doing ministry wherever he's been doing it, mostly in Galilee, turns towards Jerusalem. And we start now the process, and Jesus is doing a lot more heavy teaching, a lot less, a lot fewer miracles and healings, feedings, that kind of stuff. So we're having a lot less interaction of Jesus with people and a lot more interaction with him and his closest followers, trying to get them to understand what is coming. And in the continuity and the through line of all of this, we have Jesus starting his ministry with immediately after baptism going into the desert for temptation. And I've said it in numerous places. Ha-Satan was translated literally. So people thought that Satan was a name, when in fact it actually means temptation. It means the litigator who is pushing you, almost like the prosecution attorney in many ways. And you were on the defensive. That's what Ha-Satan was. Now the Greeks translated that as Diabolos. We get this whole mythos of a character of evil, which medieval art really played up, especially during the Dark Ages, or sorry, the Dark Plague, Black Plague. I know that better. There was no Dark Ages, and we now get this entity. So when Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Get thee behind me, Satan," the very first picture anybody pictures is this comical, guy in red, horns, tail, pitchfork, that kind of thing. Nothing to do with what Jesus is talking about. Absolutely nothing. So let's go back to the scripture and have a little deeper look at what is going on. So they're walking along, and Jesus thinks, okay, now they get the whole Messiah bit. They're more open to talking about the reality, what he's going to face. And he's wrong, and his disciples don't get it. And Peter, God bless his heart, but he really, really stumbles in it all the time. And when Jesus says all of these things are going to happen, including my death, Peter, as a good friend, says, no, no, that can't happen. We've got to stop that from happening. Far too often we reread the scripture as being very straight spoken, very even tone. I've even commented it sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher from time to time. But the reality is, we should be hearing this passage this week in the voice of exasperation. Jesus is so frustrated. Last week, he was telling Peter that his awareness would become the cornerstone of the new world. This week, he's telling Peter, you're a stumbling block. You really don't get it. Jesus cannot hear the words, no, we can't allow that to happen. He can't as a person, because he's got to be shored up. He's got to feel that strength. And so in exasperation, he turns to them and says, do you not understand anything that I've been telling you? You have to pick up your cross, which is not the actual physical wood of the cross, but you have to pick up your issue, what you want to make right, what you are willing to spend your lifetime investing in. You have to pick that and be willing to die for your cause, just like I am willing to die for all of you having freedom and a new world to live in. Because Jesus continues, those who are willing to give their life, they're going to find something. It's going to be incredible. But those who want to save their life, they're always going to have to be doing that. There's never going to be a time when you're perfectly safe. And ultimately, you're going to lose it anyway. This is the exasperation Jesus is facing as he's talking to his friends. It is not a matter of calling Peter an awkward name, although I have no illusion, Jesus being a carpenter, he probably knew some very great words. But whether he used them with Peter or not, who knows? But the thing is that he looked at Peter and he recognized, you're getting in my way. I cannot have that kind of energy around me. All of these things are going to happen to me. I have to be ready to experience them. I cannot give in to my friends wanting a different way for it to happen. The anguish that is part of that, the disappointment, the frustration, the sense of being alone must have been overwhelming. Because these were people who'd been with Jesus the entire time and still, after 3 years coming and going with each other, still did not understand the primal truth that Jesus was trying to tell them. That his very ministry, his challenge to the establishment, his criticism of scribes and Pharisees, temple leaders, of anybody who had authority and used that against someone else, there was going to be payback. He'd be naive to think otherwise. He had spent all of that time teaching others, but also shoring himself up. The message in all of this for us is uncomfortable. But it really asks us to hold a mirror up and look at who we are. Are we prepared to dedicate ourselves completely to the changes that Jesus has asked us to be part of? And that's not a light question, because most of us, myself included, are probably going to say no. Maybe the whole time, maybe part-time. When my children were little, there is no way I was going to walk away from their care to be dedicated to justice. That just wasn't going to happen. Now that they're adults, I have a little more flexibility, and the concept makes me scared. I am not a preacher because I've got it all figured out. And that's kind of one of the graces in Jesus' constant message to us. That Jesus knows, God knows, we're going to fail. We're not going to understand sometimes. We're going to have expectations that are not going to be met, and we have to recalculate that because God's not changing. God's message is consistent here. There is no doubt God is marching on through time towards justice for everybody. I had a conversation with some young women and some not so young women not that long ago. We were talking about women's rights and what has changed and what hasn't. And some of the older women and most of the younger women were saying, like, nothing has changed in all the work that people have done. And, you know, as a historian, I had to pipe in and straighten that out. Of course work has happened. Of course work has changed. We're able to do things now that 10 years ago we couldn't talk about. We are able to be in places that 40 years ago we couldn't even dream about. And that's just women. That's not including the queer community or the racialized community. People are able to be in places, be heard, do things that they were not allowed to do before. Change is happening. It's never going to be within our lifetime, and that's going to frustrate all of us because we want to see our work completed and to trust that it's going to be picked up and carried on by someone else. Sometimes that's a lot of trust and maybe too much trust to actually give the next generation. But God's time is not our time. And God's promise is consistent and historic. And God's movement does happen. Think about all the people today who are repeating the promises of God's world for inclusivity and don't even realize it comes through Jesus and his understanding of the Hebrew tradition. That's incredible when you think about it. Because at no point did Jesus ever say you have to all believe in a religion that's going to be set up around me. Never said that. He said, follow me and we're going to make a difference. And there are billions of people following the message, following the dream, that don't necessarily have a religious affiliation, or at least one that we would recognize as being a follower, but it's there. Time is changing, but it's through people being willing to risk and challenge the system and take on whatever punitive response that system decides to give back. And it's rough and it's cruel. And then the words of, if you want to save your life, if you want to live in authenticity, take up your cross, pick up your burden, pick up the fight you are going to fight with your life, with your future, with the future of those you care about. Jesus did not turn to Peter because he suddenly was embodying this world of evil that Jesus was trying to resist. Not at all. Jesus responded to Peter because Peter was giving him such an easy out. There's an entire movie, a bad one, but an entire movie about what if Jesus had opted out? What if Jesus had decided, no, I'm not going to do this? What would our world be like then? Because so much of our faith is not about following Jesus on the path. Our faith is about the resurrection and then seeing Jesus' life back through time. We have to try to not do that and follow Jesus as he goes. All of us, when we love someone, want to tell them, don't do the hard things. Don't risk yourself. It's a natural thing to do. Peter, out of love for Jesus, was saying, please don't. And Jesus very forcefully, very loudly, very firmly said, this is what I have to do for everyone's sake. Those who are willing to give their life are going to receive something. Those who are too scared to do something, they're never going to get that experience of glory. They're never going to feel what that level of accomplishment feels like. They're never going to fully be part of what the new world can be, not if they don't help create it. And as always, when we're reading the Gospels, none of this is a dividing line between people. All of this is a foretelling, a warning. So we get to choose every day we wake up whether we're going to be those people who try to make the world different, or in this case, try to be those people that hold them back because we're scared. And tomorrow we'll wake up and we will have that choice all over again, because that's also part of the promise that God has made to us, that we're allowed to stumble. We're allowed to be our own stumbling blocks, fall over ourselves, fall down, not want to risk. And then we can pick ourselves up again and say, yep, I'm ready for that fight. Let's head on to Jerusalem.